Hello, good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to today's event, EU Values Across Sectors. My name is Rory McKiernan, and I'm delighted to be your host and moderator this morning. It's a lovely sunny day here in Lahinch, County Clare, and hopefully it's sunny wherever you are too. On behalf of the Wheels Access Europe programme and Léargas, we're delighted to be here with you today to explore what we mean by EU values, and in particular, human dignity, rights, equality, democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. The event is brought to you by Léargas, the Irish National Agency for Erasmus Plus, and by the European Solidarity Corps, and by the Wheels Access Europe programme, which is an EU funding support service for Irish civil society funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs. Now, there's no doubt that the values we are here to discuss contribute in large part to making a more just, equal and inclusive society. And I think we can see clearly why this might matter now more than ever. I'm mindful in particular of the invasion of Ukraine, the plight of an estimated 13 million people who have fled their homes now, and 6 million who are refugees, including the approximately 30,000 refugees from Ukraine who are now in Ireland, with more arriving daily, who are all seeking safety and sanctuary. And I'm thinking also of those from Afghanistan and Yemen, Palestine, and the many wars that are often ignored or forgotten. And I'm thinking also of those in direct provision migrant camps in Greece, and those who continue to drown, unfortunately and tragically, in the Mediterranean. So there's such a gambit when we talk about rights and freedoms. And I'm also thinking too of Roma people, the traveling community, people with disabilities, and the attacks on LGBTQ+ people, and all those who too often have to fight for their rights to be recognized. There's no getting away from that. This is a turbulent time and a challenging time in Ireland, in Europe, and throughout the world. And as we try to make sense together of the pandemic, all that we've been through, and where do we go from here, we have to also look at the climate emergency, the challenges around division, misinformation. And I suppose there's no doubt really when it comes to that, well, for me anyway, that social solidarity remains the lifeblood of our communities and our countries. And it's very much a value that I believe is so brilliantly upheld and cultivated by those of you join us today, those of you working day in, day out on policy in the community as youth workers and throughout the community and voluntary sector and beyond. I've gone through the participant list and I see so many great people and amazing organizations that are joining us. And I want to salute you all for your work, especially those that are working against the odds and have done throughout the pandemic. And we'll be hearing more from many of you shortly, including through the chat and the comments facility and the great speakers and panelists that we have for you today. So we're going to move on now and share the agenda with you. We'll bring that up on screen so that you have an idea of what's coming up. That should be with you momentarily. Okay. And you'll see there that Lorraine Gilligan we're going to be hearing from Lorraine very shortly. And then we have our keynote speaker, Minister of State for European Affairs, Thomas Byrne. And then we'll join our first panel. We'll have a short break, a second panel, and then we'll move on to wrap up. So we'll try and keep on time and on track. And grateful to have you here with us today. We'll also be encouraging you to interact with us. We'll be doing online polls and providing opportunities for feedback during the event using Menti. Many of you will have used that before, but if you're new to it, we'll aim to make it as simple as possible. So do give it a go. So if you can say hi and join us also through the chat box and tell us where you're joining from, what organization, and also what location, if you'd like to share. I think we have people from a few different countries, but certainly the four corners of Ireland as well, which is great. Later on during the panels, if you have questions for the panelists, you can pop them into the Q&A function. And we're particularly delighted to have Olaya Gonzalez Dominguez here with us today. Olaya is joining us from Estonia. And she's a graphic recorder, and she will be creating and sharing visual representations of the key takeaways from the day. And I'll also encourage you to use social media if you wish. The hashtags are hashtag EU values and EU engage, and they'll be shared also in the chat. And you can see that in the Wheel and Léargas Twitter accounts as well. And the team from Léargas and Wheel will also be sharing the various Twitter handles that will try and make things easier for you if you want to tag or name any of the speakers. So finally, I'll just wrap up the introductions now and say that it really is people like yourselves, representatives from the community and voluntary sector, those working in adult education, youth work, and the many other areas in the sector that are so essential to promoting and protecting the values that we're here to discuss in our communities and indeed throughout Europe. So we're eager to hear from you. So please do get involved in the conversation and bring forward your questions. Now, we're going to move over to hear from Lorraine Gilligan. Lorraine Gilligan is the Executive Director of Léargas. Now, unfortunately, she is unable to join us this morning, so we're going to have a pre-recorded message from her before we head over to our keynote speaker. So we'll hear from Lorraine now. Thanks, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lorraine Gilligan, and I'm the Executive Director of Léargas. We're a national agency for European programs and initiatives, and we view our work as transformational in the lives of the people who participate in European activities and programs with us. It's my pleasure to join you this morning virtually and to take this moment to reflect on our values as Europeans. And I'd like to say thank you to the organising team, the speakers, the panellists, and all the participants for coming together at this event to explore the importance of European and EU values. Human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, human rights. There is just huge depth and meaning and hope and expectation for each of those. And some people might even question how effective Europe is in living up to those values. In fact, these values might easily be disregarded as just lofty and far away ideals. I think until you look at the work being done in projects and communities who are using so many of the initiatives that we fund in Léargas and that we support, to do their work. And when you talk to the people whose stories are changed forever as a result of taking part in and being included in European programs, then I think those values become much more visible and transparent. We can recognize those values reflected in the priorities established for the flagship Erasmus+ and European Solidarity Core programs for the next 7 years. Priorities like inclusion and diversity, the fight against climate change, participation in democratic life, and digital skills. And in Léargas, we're very privileged in our position to be able to witness how projects happening around Ireland and across Europe are already connecting with these values and priorities, from schools who are encouraging environmental awareness through games, to vocational organisations and colleges that are pioneering qualifications in digital media for their students and for young people. EU programmes, to me, they create opportunities for people to exchange and to connect on these values and priorities. They're sharing experiences through their cooperation, and they're finding ultimately that we have so much more in common than we might think at the start of our projects and cooperation together. I believe we all benefit more from shared experience, and our creativity is only enhanced when we make the space for new and for different thinking. So the question I was asked about today is, how do EU programs take those lofty values and ideals and translate them into actual projects that benefit yours and our communities? And I can tell you so many different examples of how I believe that to be true and how I see that to be true. And I can share some examples with you today, but do feel free to visit our website or contact Léargas so we can share more project stories with you. Project stories like one solidarity project hosted by Cork Global Goals, which raises awareness as a group of young people who are raising awareness of the importance of fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals. And they're doing that based out of a local park in Cork and targeting the public using that park and making it part of their experience of using that public space. In Limerick, Limerick filmmakers are working on a collaborative film project between a group of young people living in direct provision, a group of young people who identify as LGBTQ+, and another group of young people who originally were from the north of Ireland but who are settled in the south. And they're all sharing and exchanging their stories about belonging to a community and representing that creatively through film. Galway Community Circus is a project that has hosted many, many young European volunteers over the past 12 years or more. And in that time, those young people have been supported to work with other young people, perhaps even those who are young people with fewer opportunities than their peers. And all of their work is aimed at ensuring that they have the competence and the confidence to ensure that they have equal access to opportunities for those young people. So Erasmus Plus projects like youth exchanges can support inclusion and intercultural learning through their exchange among young people. There's one happening at the moment with a group of young people with fewer opportunities than their European partners. It's hosted by an organisation called Altogether Now Multicultural Centre. And I think let's not forget that 2022 is the European Year of Youth, and young people from all over Europe are engaging in activities to promote European opportunities. And in Ireland, dozens of microgrants have been awarded to schools, youth clubs, groups, and communities all over the country to do activities that they want to do that will enhance the voice of young people and help them to understand more about the opportunities that are available to them. And I think what's really important for me in terms of communicating that those values are out there and that they're in the community and that they're part of life in our communities is that all of this happens as part of the everyday work of people like you, people who are attending this workshop this morning. And by making the space today to really think about your own values and European values and the values of the people that you work for and with, I think it's so important that people on the ground in the community and voluntary sector recognise the role that you play in putting these values into action in your day-to-day work. And also the powerful impact that can have when it's done with purpose and when it's done with intent. So to sum up, I really hope that this morning you will feel that after you've had this time together and you return to your working life, that you'll have a much stronger connection to European values and how they connect with your own values as people who are active for their communities. And I hope that you also have lots of ideas and potential new opportunities to help make them a reality in your work and with the people that you're working with and working for. So thank you for inviting me to share my ramblings and my thoughts with you this morning. I hope they help in your reflections for the rest of your morning, and I hope you enjoy the great panelists and speakers that are organised for your enjoyment and also for your inspiration for the rest of the day. So thank you very much and take good care.
That's great. Thanks very much to Lorraine and to everybody from Léargas. It was very clear to me, and I'm sure it was to you as well, that the passion that Lorraine has for the work, and I would share that passion. Just, I think what really struck me was the word inclusion, but also belonging and people wanting to belong to a community and to something bigger. She mentioned purpose there as well. And just that idea that there's a goal of common purpose and shared values. So well done to everybody at Léargas, and may that great work continue. So without further ado, we're going to move on now, and we're going to hear from our keynote speaker, and that is Minister of State for European Affairs, Thomas Byrne TD. You're very welcome, Minister.
Thank you very much, Rory. Gormina Mahagov Galeras and Cura Larks live in Yov. It also Bora, Bo Valam Andas, a Hortus, na Hagati Jonaka, na Karnati. Agus na fiantar ho sílte atá ar measc in Yov an códal tá seo. My thanks to the wheel and Martha, the European Programmes Manager, and Léargas, which is the National Agency for Erasmus+, for organising this important conference. The department is very proud to fund the work that the Wheel is doing to help civil society organisations across Europe find partners and peers in Ireland, as well as helping them navigate funding streams within the EU. 2022 is the European Year of Youth, so I welcome the conference's focus on how your organisations can promote EU values in your work with young people and communities, including how Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Corps can fund projects that support the EU's values. The EU's fundamental values unite us as Europeans. We hear about them so often that we often forget what they really are, and forget really to think about them, to reflect on them, to consider them. Machna Vienna, as the president might say. But they weren't listing again. It's freedom, democracy, rule of law, equality, human rights, and human dignity. So in all of its activity, the EU works to safeguard these values in order to ensure that inclusion, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and respect for the rule of law prevail. These values underpin the well-being of all of the European Union citizens in their day-to-day lives. They support indeed the functioning of the single market that rests on those values, and they create social and territorial cohesion that's necessary for solidarity across the Union. So they form the very bedrock of the Union. But these values were in fact codified before the European Economic Community was established by the Council of Europe. The Council, of course, is a completely separate and distinct organisation, though it does include all member states of the EU. It also includes UK, Turkey, Norway and Ukraine and some others. But Ireland was one of 10 countries in 1949 who founded the Council of Europe on May the 20th. And tomorrow, May the 20th, Ireland then actually takes the presidency of the Council of Europe for the next 6 months. The overarching goal of our presidency will be to support this work and to renew what President Higgins called the conscience of Europe when he described the Council of Europe. This year also marks the 50th anniversary of Ireland's decision to become a member of what is known as the European Union. Our decision to join was a courageous one. Our independence at that time, only 50 years old, was fragile and jealously guarded. It took courage to imagine a new Ireland. It took courage to look towards a more optimistic and more confident future. But the courageous decision was the right decision. There's no doubt that the decision to join the EEC at the time has since brought transformative and positive change across Irish society. But in a very short space of time, Ireland made its presence felt within the EU. When Patrick Hillery served as European Commissioner for Social Affairs and introduced the Equal Pay Directive and the Equal Treatment Directive in 1975, which placed the rights of women at the heart of European policy. So the European Union changed Ireland, but Ireland's footprint in respect of European social progress can also be seen. EU has been a catalyst in the creation of a prosperous, progressive and peaceful Ireland in which we live today. And Ireland in turn is also proud to contribute very strongly to today's European Union. The generations since accession, and I'm one of them born after accession, we've had opportunities that were unimaginable to our parents. Freedom to travel, to live, to reap the benefits of programs like Erasmus+, and to study and work freely across all of the European Union. Membership of the EU has helped us to imagine and build a country that is fairer and a kinder place than it was, one that lives and embodies those European values that are listed. The values mean that we in Ireland must hold ourselves, and are held indeed, to a high standard. When we slip, we expect our friends to press us to do better. And over the early decades of our membership of the EU, that's exactly what happened. Joining the then European Economic Community led to the introduction of legislation on gender equality in the workplace and entitlements to maternity and paternity leave over time. The marriage bar was deemed illegal under European law and was repealed. Very strange law when you think about it now, maybe not really comprehensible to today's generations, but it was there, but we changed it. Looking back at how far we have come, we can see more than most that the benefits of having friends to hold you accountable to your commitments are very, very strong. Whenever we see our friends not living up to their legal obligations and failing to uphold our shared values, we do as others did for us. We urge them to do better, and where necessary, we stand up for the values that we have all worked so hard to build. And those values, again, are the foundations of social progress, but also economic progress as well. Indeed, we're very inspired by our Ukrainian friends and how they are standing up for European values in the midst of dire circumstances. They're defending those very fundamental European Union democratic freedoms and values. But democracy is complex. It should be noisy, messy, vibrant, and competitive. The ability of independent civil society organizations to shout and be heard from the sidelines is just important as the rules of democracy themselves. That's why, despite the challenges, the role of civil society across Europe is more important than ever. Of course, none of you is here because of politics or Council of Europe declarations or European treaty obligations. You are here because you do your work and you believe in it, you believe it is necessary, and you believe it is urgent. And I'm sure, despite the sacrifices and the challenges, you enjoy the work and you get a sense of purposeful and personal reward from it. I'm a lawyer by background, so I am trained in the importance of often obscure details of the law, but as a minister and public representative, I also understand that the finer points of the law and policy can often feel at a remove from everyday lives. The relevance can seem remote, but we must endeavour to make policy, which is aimed at improving lives, a reality for people in the interest of creating a better society. When it comes to defining ourselves, not just against something like Russia's invasion of Ukraine, though it is very necessary to be against that, but in terms of something positive in defining ourselves, that's when our values play their role. Our values are something tangible, which we can point to and say, this is who we are, and this is what we stand for. And by standing in solidarity with Ukraine, this is exactly what we're doing. But of course, that would be meaningless without the civil society organizations who personify those values. Politics does not happen in a vacuum. Treaties and laws and traditions are powerless unless acted upon. And democracy cannot exist independently of its values and the actions of the people it represents. The cradle of democracy in each country rests in a woven fabric of civil and community society. This is a fabric hand-spun by individuals and small organizations all around the European Union, all around Ireland, and almost always done without fanfare or headlines. But the work done day in, day out by individuals, NGOs, social enterprises is what makes these values living and tangible. It is the work that translates our values into real improvements in people's lives, and the cumulative effect then is a society that is fairer, more just, and more inclusive. The goal of building a fairer, more just society is one that we indeed should all strive for. That is why our values that underpin the work of civil society are so precious. And with all precious things, they're fragile. Civil society is under pressure in some European democracies. We cannot allow that to happen in the European Union, and we certainly cannot allow that to happen in Ireland. So your work is really, really critical. So because each of you on this call today are custodians of those values that act as the bedrock of not just civil society, but our society. It's your work that creates a rich, colourful and noisy landscape that we call democracy, and it's your work that gives life and meaning to those values on the ground. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing. And I hope that you will, and no doubt that you'll find this conference useful. And I want to wish you all the very best of luck in your funding applications. And I know that with the help of the wheel, many of you will be successful in that, and we look forward to seeing the fruits of all that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thanks for that address. We're going to hand over to Emma now. That's Emma Murta, and she is the European Programmes Manager at the Wheel. But before we do, I just want to note that we've been getting lots of comments into the chat, and I just want to give particular welcome to those of you that commented. We have certainly several people, well, most people from Ireland, but we also have people from Macedonia. We've got comments from Belgrade, Romania, Serbia, Armenia, Turkey, Russia, Germany, Hungary, Albania. So Azerbaijan came in there as well. It's starting to feel like the Eurovision here. I might feel like I'm presenting the wrong gig, but it's great to have you all there. And we have in the middle of all that Dublin 8 and Kilkenny and all around Ireland as well. So you're all very welcome. So I'll hand over to Emma Murta now from the Wheel.
I'm tuning in from Longford this morning, so thank you, Rory. I just wanted to quickly say a really big thank you to, on behalf of the Wheel and Léargas, to Minister of State Thomas Byrne for his input today. Very inspiring words and very important, particularly in the current context, to be reminded of what the values really mean for us as a union and for the very important role that civil society plays in protecting them and promoting them. And just to note that, as the Minister mentioned, Minister Byrne and the Department of Foreign Affairs have been extremely supportive of civil society engaging in European programmes and policy. They are the funder of our Access Europe programme, which is an EU funding support programme for civil society in Ireland, but they also run a Communication Euro initiative with Europe initiatives, I should say, that provides funding to civil society groups for projects that raise awareness of the role of the EU in our daily lives as citizens. So we know that the Minister is very busy, and we really, really appreciate his time today and the well wishes for our event. But that's it from me. Just wanted to say thank you.
Thanks very much, Emma. It's starting to kick off now in the chat. We've got more. We've got where have we got? Georgia and France and Kyrgyzstan and also Ukraine. Special hello to friends in Ukraine. And Valentia Island in County Kerry. So we won't get carried away on the geography here, but it is exciting to be able to connect with so many people in this way. So we're going to move on now to some of the interactive elements, and particularly what we're calling a Menti moment. So those of you probably are familiar with using interactive polls, but if not, Menti is just going to give us a sense of who's in the room today. Going to bring up a link that you can use, or you can scan the barcode, and you can link that using a phone if you want. Hopefully it'll be straightforward. It'll come up and we'll share it in the chat on screen as well. And I just really want to get a sense of who is in the room. We have, as I said, already got a decent enough sense of the geography, but we want to know, are there more teachers or youth workers and that kind of thing. So we'll leave that up for a couple of minutes to try and get a sense, and then we will be heading over to Olaya to get a sense of the graphic harvesting and how that's all going. So so we'll give it a minute. For hopefully it's clear cut. The link is now in the chat. You simply just need to click on the link, and we'll leave it up for a little bit, and then we'll try and see the results, or else we will head over to Olaya if she's ready in momentarily. Give her some time to pull things together. I can't imagine how she's doing that job to pull everything together from all the comments in the video and from Minister Byrne's comments, but there's the gift of talented people. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of the results, and there'll be more inputs from her as we progress throughout the event as well. Okay, so maybe we'll go to Olaya now. Are you ready to go? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. And feel free to share any thoughts or comments that you'd like to accompany what you're going to show to us, and you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me correctly.
Yeah,
and
all good.
In a second, you should be able to see my screen that I'm sharing at the moment. So yeah, we had 2 short inputs so far. We have most of the interesting event ahead of us, but we had very interesting inputs connected with the importance of the EU values that make us united as a society. With Lorraine, we reflected a little bit on the importance of education and youth work activities, and especially when it is done meaningfully and with purpose, as she indicated. And the importance of EU programs allowing and creating the space for these possibilities. And then with Minister Thomas Byrne, we also looked back at history and the impact of the EU and the EU values in Ireland, and vice versa as well, and how they conform the reality that we live in and the world that we want to see also in the future, and how important this relies on civil society actors as well.
Excellent. Well done. Are you going at like the speed of lightning when you're doing that, or? Yeah,
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay. Great. I'd love to see it in action. Great. Thanks so much, Olaya. We'll be back to you soon. So we're now going to just have a quick look, hopefully, if all goes smooth, on the Menti results, if they can be brought up on screen. Drum roll. Okay, just give it another moment.
Can you see those results, Rory?
No, can't see results. I can't
okay.
anyway. I'm presuming other people can't see them. I can see questions and somebody scrolling through.
Oh, yeah, those are the results.
Oh, those are the results.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
okay, grand. Okay.
So we've got people from school education, from community development. Is that what you're saying?
I just presumed there it was still in real-time mode that somebody's screen was sharing. I'm not as quick as Elia there. Things work a lot slower here in Clare, you know. Okay, do you want to comment on those as they come up?
Yeah, sure. So people are just kind of, the Menti will be open all day. We'll have several Mentis. They'll be open to the end of the day. So if people don't have a chance to submit in real time, then they can do it later on today, but people are just kind of constantly submitting. So that's why it's kind of scrolling. So we've got a lot of people from youth work, from the community sector, the voluntary sector, from the European Solidarity Corps. And then we had a second question here. Should be able to see this now. Yeah. Which words come to mind when you think of EU values? So this is just kind of a handy word cloud, so you can see the values that kind of were most frequently mentioned by people. So democracy, solidarity, freedom, human rights, equal opportunities, awareness, civil society. So yeah, good spread.
Brilliant. There's enough there for you to write a song out of that. If you fancy.
Yeah.
Eurovision entry from the participants here. Who knows? Next year they could allow anyway. I need to mind myself. My imagination will get carried away with me. So, okay, let's move along, folks, and we'll try and keep everyone on track, and we'll get you to your tea or coffee break in due course as well. But first, we're going to move on to our first panel. And the first panel is on human dignity, rights and equality. We have Jane Carter, and Jane is the Inclusion and Diversity Officer at Léargas. As I said earlier, it's the Irish National Agency for EU Programmes in Education, Training and Youth, including the Erasmus Plus programme. We also have Rory Hart, the Head of Strategy for the European Movement Ireland, and EMI aims to develop the connection between Ireland and Europe. We also have Kay McCabe, and Kay is a senior project worker with Involve. Involve is an organisation many of you will know. It specialises in working with the Irish traveller community through its youth service and other activities. And finally, last but not least, we have Mary McCaughey, and she is the Head of Information and Communication in Eurofound, which is the EU agency for the improvement of living and working conditions. You're all very, very welcome. I always get a little bit nervous around panels because I want to hear from everybody, and I know you're going to have many years of experience and expertise and insight, but we're not really going to get too much time together. So we'll just try and move it along as quickly as possible. But I'm going to start with Jane, if that's okay. And Jane, I'm going to just ask you to tell me a little bit about, because I know a lot of people are here because they're interested, particularly around the funding aspect. So that's just maybe one of the more practical aspects that people might benefit from, is learning more about how we can kind of bring these values into, realize them through our projects and our work. But to do that, obviously we need funding. It's almost the first question you get from a community or a youth worker, or how is it funded? Where can we get the funding? And unfortunately, it's such an important question. So if you could tell me a little bit about the types of funding available from the likes of Erasmus Plus and the European Solidarity Corps, that'd be great.
Thank you very much. So as you mentioned, Léargas is the national agency for the Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Corps. So these are two separate European programs. So that means that organisations from Ireland can apply to us with a project that they'd like to have funded. The projects that are funded as well are coming from the ground up. So they're in response to a community, a national or an international need. So more often than not, they're promoting the EU values that we're talking about today.
Gotcha.
For some people, when they think of Erasmus Plus, they think of students going in university, going abroad to another European country to study. But this is only one aspect of the program. So Erasmus Plus is for every learner and looks at lifelong learning, which means it supports ongoing learning of European citizens, starting from a very young age of right through to adult education.
Okay. I actually didn't know that. So I feel educated and enlightened. That's brilliant. I didn't know, it applied to the different age groups. How do you feel that this type of funding plays a particular role in promoting diversity and inclusion?
So the program supports and promote diversity and inclusion in a number of ways. So it's a priority of both programs. It's one of the 4 priorities of the current programs. And we're actively supporting projects that have an inclusion and diversity focus as well. They're open to everybody to take part in the programs, but we also acknowledge that some people may experience barriers or different obstacles to taking part, or not see the programs as an option for themselves. Yeah. So there are a number of ways that inclusion is built into the programs, whether it's financial means or other exceptions within the program to support everybody being able to take part.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Jane. So we'll move along. We might get back to you before we finish up the panel. Thank you. I'm going to move along to Rory. And as people might know, EMI, European Movement Ireland, has been leading on engaging Irish citizens in the conference on the future of Europe, which has been the EU's year-long initiative to hear citizens' views on Europe and particular future challenges and priorities. So I'm just wondering, Rory, first of all, you're very welcome, but I'm wondering, how do these particular values connect, do you think, with the future of Europe?
It's a very good question. I think for something like this, the idea of kind of being able to engage in kind of things happening in Europe beyond that kind of really sedate and kind of 5-year European Parliament cycle, it really kind of lent itself to what the minister was just saying there about kind of noisy, kind of pushing against the usual sort of political discourse. And that's almost what the conference was. Kind of the main conclusions finished up there recently, and it was kind of pulling together people to kind of discuss the future of Europe and what they see as the most valuable things the next 5, 10, 20 years. I'm not just talking about kind of really static policy thing, but really talking about kind of how values kind of tie into it. So you're talking about everything from how people want to see minority rights protected both in the EU, but kind of how the EU can support nations in the broader EU neighborhood and around the world in kind of protecting those rights, in kind of working against that idea of kind of democratic backsliding, where some countries in the EU are kind of maybe moving away from what we see as kind of the standard kind of European rights, and kind of working together as a broader European community to kind of reverse that and kind of bring those rights together. So I think the future of Europe, and certainly the conference on the future of Europe, where it's giving this voice to everyone and kind of giving this opportunity for people to have their say and have their values heard and being able to voice their values. I think it's been a really great way to demonstrate that those values are at play on a day-to-day level for people.
And have you found people willing to engage? Because often the engagement comes in a kind of a messy format. We've all seen the kind of craziness online and so on, but have you found it people willing and up for it? Yeah,
very much so. So the way we structured, so we were one of the Department of Foreign Affairs main partners in kind of reaching out to people. And what we did was we reached out through civil society so that we could talk to people kind of in smaller villages around the country and the regions, as well as Dublin, and then talk to people on a sectoral basis. So we talked to people working in minority groups, we talked to people living in kind of, or working in agricultural sector, things like that. And the thing about this sort of engagement is when you give people an opportunity to speak and you are clear to them, if you're going to speak, we're going to listen to you and this is going to be something that is heard. People are really happy to engage. So if you sit down and have that conversation and say, listen, what do you want to see happen? What's important to you? Where kind of what rights are important to you? What economic stuff is important to you? What values kind of drive your idea of Europe? People really want to have that conversation. And so instead of just them ticking boxes in an election, it's really kind of giving that broader space to talk. Yeah, it's ultimately a more engaged, lively democracy that is more participative, which is what we should all be aspiring to do anyway. So exactly, so great to hear. That sort of forum is fantastic. Thanks, Rory.
So just finally, just any particular big issues coming up, or do you feel that these issues are coming up as key themes, the values that have been listed already?
Yeah, very much so. I think kind of if we look at them, I know I mentioned them there, but kind of democratic backsliding across Europe, that's something that certainly in Ireland, kind of panelists and people engaging with it really focused on. Protecting rights for people across Europe and beyond was very much at the core of what we talked about. But even beyond that, there was some really kind of future orientated things. Certainly in Ireland, there was a lot of conversation about how we recognize the plight of climate migrants and kind of this new area of kind of people that need protection internationally.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting because it wasn't something that I saw driven in other countries having that conversation, but we were really, really keen on it.
That's good to hear, yeah.
Yeah, so kind of lots of really interesting things coming up.
Brilliant. That's encouraging that is coming up, because that's coming down the tracks, and well, it's already a reality. So thanks, Rory. So Kay, we'll go to you next. I hope you're ready to rock, are you?
Yeah.
Good stuff, Kay. So you're very welcome. Could you tell me about the Employable Me project at Involve Mead? And I'd love to know, firstly, where the idea came from.
Well, thank you very much for having me. But I work with mostly with the traveling community and other disadvantaged young people who probably would have generational unemployment. So the whole idea of you being employable is something that maybe doesn't, it's not something you recognize or something that you would even understand, that a lot of us, maybe the rest of us, take for granted. So we were working with one young man in particular, and literally he just kept repeating, because we were saying about being employable, and he was like, me, employable. Me employable. So the whole idea was like, well, let's make me employable. So we came up with the idea of the Employable Me. And without the organization like Léargas, who give us so much support for funding and patience and support for application forms, and when they say they reach out to organizations like us and work with young people with fewer opportunities, they really do. To me, when I think of Erasmus, I'm the opposite of you. I only think of youth work. I don't even think of the college side or the education side. We do youth exchanges. We've done KA3 structured dialogue projects and toolkit developments and the lovely ESC program. So the whole idea came about, thankfully, before 2019, you had to go abroad to do an ESC, a European Solidarity Corps.
Yeah.
So that really put it out of reach for a lot of our young people due to cultural reasons, lacking in confidence and other different barriers. They wouldn't or couldn't participate in an ESC in another country. So when it became that you could now do it in country, that really opened a new game to us altogether, and it made it that we could really start thinking about helping our young people. Like our unemployment rate in the traveling community is at over 82%. So, you know what I mean? There's a considerable unemployment there. And, you know, we really wanted to engage with young people. And we actually saw from our previous ESC program how employable our past ESC participant became, because over the year he had developed confidence skills, he had developed employability skills and work skills, you know, and we helped him work on himself. So the second time around, we actually asked for 2 participants. We were nearly a victim of our own success, because halfway through the program, one of our participants actually got a job. So we were kind of like, oh God, I didn't think it would work that quickly.
Yeah.
So thankfully we contacted Léargas, and because he was just less than 6 months with us, we could actually look for a 3rd participant. So within that program, we ended up actually helping 3 young people instead of 2. And out of the 3 of them are currently employed full time. So, you know, it really did work. It really put in, you know, those opportunities for these young people to look at themselves and take a time to, you know, feel like they were part of a team and look at themselves. And unfortunately, as our young people have said, even through the youth exchanges, our young Irish travellers feel more accepted in Europe than they do in Ireland. And that's not great. That's not a great thing to hear our young people say.
It's a huge indictment, isn't it? And you can see it in suicide and mental health.
Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, the mental health within the traveling community, suicide rates are 7 times higher for men from the traveling community than they are from the settled community. And unemployment and things like that have a huge connection to those issues and those ongoing problems. So, you know what I mean? We're in a very lucky position. As the minister said earlier on, like a lot of us that are here, we're not in it for the big paychecks. We're in it for the love of the job. And I'm in a very lucky position to really enjoy my job and to work with young people that I work with who make it, you know, what it is. So this year we've applied for 2 more ESC participants, and we're actually for the first time ever going to take on an ESC participant from another country. So that's going to bring Europe into our youth project in a more kind of physical stance, if you know what I mean, because that young person will be from France. So you know what I mean, and like we have a big map of Europe on our wall. Our young people see it all the time. We're going to Italy this year on a youth exchange. So, you know, European values are really embedded. There's a European flag on our wall constantly. So I think maybe even more so than some youth services, our young people are very aware of their position and their right to Europe. I brought some of my young staff recently to, who would be mostly from the travelling community, to Minister Thomas Burns, EU panelist on the future of Europe. And that was an amazing opportunity for them to go into a room with other young people from Ireland and to have their say as employed young people in Ireland, but also from a very, you know, a community with fewer opportunities. And it was alien to them. And I won't say it sat comfortably with them, and there wasn't funny conversations on the way home in the car. But, you know, it was an amazing opportunity, and BMI were involved in that. It was an amazing opportunity to give my young staff as well, you know.
Well, it strikes me that, you know, the fact that it might have been alien to them, the reality is, like, a lot of civic engagement is alien to a lot of people, and it shouldn't be, because if it's a functional, healthy, vibrant democracy, we should all be involved, and it should be kind of normalized to that extent. But I'm really struck by how employment is such a driver in terms of looking at the values, because I think many of us take just jobs and employment and careers for granted. And that you mentioned the word confidence there, and obviously there's an underlying issue around perhaps racism, prejudice, or discrimination, but the idea of building up confidence, there's no better experience of seeing somebody flourish from going from that feeling, and we've mentioned mental health, to then going almost a full circle. It'd be wonderful then to see them become the champions and leaders, to become train a trainer type stuff, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, like we know, and we do, like even within my own staff, a guy who's with me now, he's actually in Maynooth studying a level 8 on global youth work. He came to me as a participant when he was 12. He came back to me as a volunteer when he was 17, then on a CE program, and now he's a paid employee by Involved studying to be a youth worker.
Yeah.
So I do actually have the pleasure of seeing it, which a lot of youth workers don't.
Yeah.
But like, a lot of our young people, to tell you the truth, Rory, they don't even get work experience or work placement on their LCA programs or in Youth Reach, because people won't even give work experience to young travellers. You know, there's a fear, there's a misnomer, there's a misunderstanding, and there's a real discrimination out there. So for us to be able to give that opportunity to the young people is a fantastic opportunity. We actually do give those placements to young people, even you know, from the LCA programs and things like that. Yeah. And like, we see it all the time when the peer leadership is so important. And like, why we reapplied this year after taking a year break because of COVID with the ESC was because our young people said, can I do what Danny did and what Emily did? You know what I mean? Like, so they can see it, and it's paid forward so quickly. You know what I mean? It's amazing.
Excellent. That's fantastic. And obviously we'd love to see that work ripple around Ireland and the same work in every county. Thanks, Kay.
Absolutely. No
Appreciate
problem.
it. So we're going to move on to Mary. Mary, you're very welcome. Mary, we'd love to just get this sense from Eurofound's perspective. What do you think needs to be done, perhaps, to help people better understand the importance of some of the values we've been discussing? You know, do you think that the average European understands what's going on and the role in particular that the youth and community service plays?
Yeah, I think, thank you for inviting me. And I am conscious that I'm coming from an EU institutional perspective, which sometimes can feel, certainly to the young people that Kay was referring to earlier and others, perhaps a little bit kind of removed from their day-to-day lives. And I'm very conscious that that's a gap that we are trying to close as EU institutions, and to ensure that not only young people, but other people who are disenfranchised or excluded, who feel on the outside of society or on the margins, do feel that the institutions and the EU in general is working towards those goals of rights, solidarity, non-discrimination, inclusion. And it is really important to understand that that is at the core of what the EU has always been about. And I think, you know, I was looking just in advance of today, and I was thinking it's really very telling that Eurofund was one of the first EU agencies to be established. We have a series of like 40 plus EU agencies across the European Union now. But back in 1975, there were none. And Eurofund, alongside the Vocational Training Agency, was one of the first agencies to be established. And you have to look at that and say, at that time, the European community actually thought that the improvement of living and working conditions was one of its top priorities to focus on. And at that time, it was the core. And now I'm listening to, you know, social inclusion, access to the labour market, disability rights, gender equality, the elements that Rory was talking about on the conference on the future of Europe. I mean, all of those things are still very much on the agenda of institutions at EU level, but also for the agencies like us. And when we look at this, the social model is really what's enshrined in the treaty. When you talk about trying to take that back to people, I mean, really, I suppose our greatest goal is to ensure that the people who are working within these communities understand very clearly that that is what is the ultimate objective, is to see this playing out in people's lives and work on a daily basis. So that everything that we do here, which is essentially research, I mean, we're researching, we survey, we analyze, we provide data, but it is for policymakers. But that's not where it stops. The policymakers then are expected to integrate that into policies which shape the lives and work of the individuals that we're talking about today. So I think it's really important to try and close that gap and make it really a very simple, almost linear transition that is very clear from the beginning right through to the end, when it impacts on the lives of the young people that the colleagues were talking about.
Very interesting. I suppose a lot of it kind of comes down to trust as well, trust in the institutions and trust in the process and the deliberations and so on. And, you know, this is where the danger that cynicism kicks in and a breakdown of trust, and sometimes quite rightly, but I suppose it's to try and cultivate and then maintain trust, because it's almost a precious contract between the institution and the citizen. And I think we have numerous examples globally and sadly now within the EU of where trust can break down and lead to very dangerous and divisive discourse. So I suppose for me, what comes to mind is the idea that those voices aren't just listened to, that they go into policy formation, as you said. But would you have perhaps maybe examples of how you know, Eurofund's recommendations, for instance, have ended up informing the policy process?
Certainly. I mean, you touch on the trust issue, and maybe I can come back to that later, because that's one of my kind of favorite issues to discuss.
Well, go for it now.
Okay.
If you want.
It links in very much to what we're talking about here, because we have seen in the research that we've carried out that essentially there's a very close link between providing access to good public services, engaging with communities, building up social capital at community level, and ensuring that there's greater trust in the institutions in general. So that could be institutions in, you know, it could be the health service, but it could also be government, it could be national parliaments, and it could be the EU. So it's sort of a no-brainer to say that if we work well at community level, and also if we ensure that we invest in the public services, we increase and enhance trust. And of course, the downside of that is that when you don't have good trust, then you develop discontent and social exclusion. And now, and I know you're going to come on to that at a certain stage when we talk about Ukraine, but with the war in Ukraine, we have now seen that there is this growing vocal minority who are already disengaged and were actively dissatisfied with the world and the societies that they were living in. And they're giving voice to this, whereas before people were exiting, they're now giving voice to this in a way that before they didn't vote. Now they're voting, and they're voting dangerously. So this is a minority which is growing. We're looking at something like nearly 20%, and this is down to trust. And when we were looking at COVID and during the whole COVID period, and indeed beforehand with the Great Recession, we looked at a fall off in trust. So the trust in EU and the trust in national institutions fell. It plummeted across the EU. Then it began to build itself back up. often because the EU was seen to bring together SURE and the regeneration body when it was looking at trying to address the COVID issues. When it comes to Ukraine, are we showing enough solidarity? And that's also going to build up trust and ensure that we galvanize the positive nature of this. If, however, we're seen to be doing too much, we're feeding also into this particular minority who actually believe that this is something we shouldn't be doing. So it's a fundamental aspect of the work that we're carrying out at the moment. And in fact, we have a report which is coming down on the basis of research this year, which is called Trust and Discontent. What are the policies we can put in place to boost and ensure that we consolidate trust in our society to avoid the development of the kind of populist and movements that we've seen, which are really very dangerous and potentially destabilizing for our communities. So just that's my little aside. Then very quickly, I just say, have we seen it? Yes. I would like to take one example, which is really important, is on young people. We looked at research which dug deep into the cost that it was for the European taxpayer and the EU GDP not to integrate young people who were not in education, training, or work or employment. And we looked at that and it came to something like 150 billion euro a year. Okay, that sort of costing exercise allowed policymakers to say, this cannot continue, we need to act. They integrated, they applied their minds to it, and they launched the Youth Guarantee, which recently has just been reinforced with a new reinforced Youth Guarantee, which ensures that every young people has to have access within a specific period of time to employment or training opportunities. And that's a very kind of clear and vivid example of the work that we do, making sense to policymakers who put that into policy, and then it filters out across the European Union and hopefully reaches all young people across the EU.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mary. We're going to just encourage, a couple of questions have been coming in from participants. So you're all very welcome to use the chat facility to ask questions of Jane, Rory, Kay and Mary. And a few questions have come in, but I'll just, one of them that has just come in for you, Mary, and it's back to your favorite topic is trust, but you've sort of more or less covered a fair amount of it. But if you could sort of briefly touch on, if you had a wish list around what perhaps civil society can do to enhance trust in the EU project. Have you any thoughts on that?
How it can enhance trust in the EU project itself? Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, I think what we need to see is investment again in the services that are available to people. And we've seen that link. And so you invest in education, you get a payback. I think Kay was talking about that, Jane was talking about that earlier. I mean, it's sort of a very obvious solution to this particular education. Health services. I mean, this is something where if you invest in health services, if you invest in public infrastructure, you see a payback, which is much longer term in terms of the impact it has on communities, on local communities, on society, and that ripple effect that goes along to the national level. And that's, I don't think we can underestimate what happens at community level, because that's social capital that you build up by giving people the confidence to be able to interact within their local community, which then builds on and pushes out into a much wider tidal, if you like, approach to development and engagement in society. So I think from a policy perspective, you need to put the infrastructure in place, you need to invest in it, and then, you know, it sort of like goes by itself after that. Yeah,
you're not wrong there, and you're not going to find many people here disagreeing with you in terms of the need for investment. And I think there's been so much under and de-investment over the last 10 years or so, particularly in the and almost not just a dependency, but a taking for granted of aspects of civil society that can often be burnt out and creaking at the seams. And I see it day in, day out, the heroic work that's going on. So thanks for that, Mary. And we have a question for you, Rory. And the question is just, somebody wants to know, what do you see happening with the specific results that you're generating around the Conference of the Future of Europe, and what do you think will change?
Good question. So the official report kind of from the year-long process was announced on Europe Day, so 9th of May, Monday just gone. And I suppose the conversation now is how that is implemented. So there's a few different people or a few different kind of sides. One who's have decided that it's within the treaties, we can just go ahead with these things, send it to the presidents of like the European Parliament, the European Commission, and just get moving on this. And then there's other member states who kind of see the broader picture and think this is a huge amount of work. Maybe we should think about how this might affect our treaties in the future. But I think for me, if we bring it back to civil society there and kind of the voice of citizens, something that was really important in it was that there were panels of Europeans kind of that came together and discussed the different topics at it. And one thing that came from a lot of panels was that they wanted accountability in this, that they weren't necessarily tied to whatever results. They believed in the rules that came out, but they wanted reports back from those people about how this stuff is going to be implemented in the future, whether it be every 6 months, every year. And so I think that's the question. How is it going to be implemented? How are these decisions going to be a kind of part of Europe's future? But also, how do we see that happening? How is it a transparent process, and how everyone can see, as I say, their voice reflected in what happens going in the future? That's a bit of a vague answer. I can't say how it will go perfectly, but there's the direction of travel.
Yeah, well, I think you've definitely identified one of the big dominant needs is to see that feedback loop in motion and to see it come back, and the transparency around where our information and our voices end up and what other voices are maybe competing with our voices. So thank you, Rory. So just a question has come in for Kay as well. We've only another few minutes on the panel, but might have time for one more question if anyone wants to chip one in. And Kay, this question is, how is the increasing pressure for qualifications and needing degrees and so on, how is that pressure for entry-level jobs affecting your work, and what impact do you think it will have, and where do you think Erasmus can help in particular there?
Well, from an Erasmus point of view, I actually did a study visit to Finland when I studied European Youth Mobility Management with Léargas, and it's a lovely mouthful of course. But in Finland, for example, I think we need to look to our neighbours. Like, why has there never been a shortage of apprenticeships? Why has there never been a shortage? Why does the snobbery exist in Ireland towards education attainment? Like, we need plumbers, we need carpenters, there's only so many engineers we need in the country. And not only that, I actually had a really good discussion with someone recently about the amount of unhappy young people who are in courses because the colleges make these elite numbers and they pick them out of the sky, and it seems to be the higher your numbers are, the more prestigious your course is. And you have a lot of very unhappy engineers doing engineering when they probably would have preferred to do medicine, and you have very unhappy people in medicine who probably wanted to be an architect. So I think we need to look at our culture. We need to approach it from a different stance. We need to reinforce that education and qualification attainment is done in many different ways. Like I love in Spain, for example, one of the names for a youth worker is a social educator. And I love that name, you know what I mean? Because why should education, like, we're non-formal educators, and I love that thinking, as a non-formal education. But, I'm not saying we teach young people more than schools do, but we possibly teach them more that they're going to carry into their adulthood, unless they're in a pub quiz, than schools do. So, you know what I mean? I think it's really important that we need to sit back and we need to reassess and we need to act, because I'm so sick of sitting around tables and talking about stuff of what we can do. And I think actions is what's needed. And, people need to learn how to take other and alternative routes, and that what 17-year-old you wants to do, maybe not what 30-year-old you wants to do. And that's perfectly fine. And that comes from someone who actually did change her career and left teaching with the lovely holidays and all the rest to become a youth worker with the no lovely holidays and all the rest, but for job satisfaction. And I think that's really important. And I think we need to get rid of the snobbery. And I do like the community and youth sector for that reason, because I came into youth work with no youth work qualifications, and I got my qualifications while I was here. You know what I mean? While I had a teaching degree, I didn't have a youth work qualification. So I just think we need actions and enough talking, and we need to start acting and encouraging the different sectors to come together to make it possible for all young people, regardless of their backgrounds, to be able to access jobs, you know what I mean, in any sector without there being an obstacle of qualifications.
Here, rally cry there. Okay, fair play. Yeah, and I think maybe the moment has come for that argument to be heard, because there's, we need, excuse me, however, 100,000 many new homes, 30 to 50,000 a year, and they're saying at every level now there's a shortage of 50 up to 30 to 50,000 skilled workers. And you're absolutely right. Something happened along the way where things got out of balance. So, and I love that about social workers, social educators. Yeah. So we're going to move on, but before we do, I'll just ask Jane if she has any final comments from that panel that you'd like to share.
Yeah, thank you so much. I suppose just something to leave you with is that if you were inspired today or inspired from this panel, if you even have a kernel of an idea of some way that you think that the EU programs could support the work that you do, please get in touch with us. Léargas, as Kay very kindly mentioned, we do try and champion a highly supportive approach. So we'll come to you and we'll meet you and see how an EU program in whatever form can support the work that you're already doing and develop it in whatever direction works for you. So thank you.
I've done it. I've finally done the talking while muted. It happens to us all. Anyway, someday I'll get by without that. So thank you so much to all our panelists, to Jane, thank you for that, to Rory, to Kay, and to Mary. Great insights and reflections and calls to action there. And we're going to now go back to Menti, and we're going to bring up the link. It's a different link each time. So you can click the link, scan the barcode, go to the link on your phone. The link is in the chat. So it's a new code, and there's 3 specific questions this time. Number 1, what are your takeaways from that panel discussion? The second will be, how do you think these values impact you and your work? And the final question will be, how can we better promote these values in Europe today? So going back to the first question, it is, what are your takeaways from the panel discussion? So we'll give you a few moments on that before moving on to the next question. And we will also be going back to Olaya just in a few moments as well. But I'll give her, I can imagine her flying around the place at lightning speed there, but we'll give her a little bit more time, and we'll keep the Menti rolling now. Just give you all a moment to answer there. Yeah, the trust issue has definitely been a big one. Mary, lots of great insights on that. Someone has said the focus has left me confused. I'd love to know more about what you mean by that. If you use the chat, that'll be good. Just talking about the opportunities, the value of EU participation, trust again and collaboration, investment in community projects, having a bigger perspective. Trust again, come up again, trust a 4th or 5th time there. Early intervention, yeah, that's always a big one in community and youth work, and should be really in all work. Bigger perspective on democracy and democratic values. What else have we got? So yeah, so keep those coming in if you wish. The value of participation, yeah, we talked about that. Okay, so we're going to go and see, is Olaya ready? Olaya, come in. Estonia, do you hear us? How are you?
I really do. There I go. I'll share now
Great.
a few of the extracts from the first panel. So we definitely heard a lot. Very insightful. We took a look at what different programs, EU-funded programs, can offer, both within Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity projects, how they respond to needs, how they are based on different key priorities that are set for the whole of the EU programs, but also specifically for each one of the countries. And then also we heard about the conference on the future of Europe, how important it is, and the fact that it provides a space for citizens to get involved, get engaged, and speak up, share their values, share their views, and what they want to see in our shared reality and shared society. Then we also were part of this Employable Me. So we got a chance to hear the story of this project that is under the European Solidarity Corps. So this volunteering activity, how it empowers youth coming from the traveling community. And yeah, so all the benefits that this relatively new opportunity brought to the reality. Then also hearing from the European institutions perspective, the fact that, yeah, sometimes trust, it's a bit difficult to maintain or to make visible or to really make stable. But at the end of the day, it was also, we followed a few examples of how these platforms and the fact that citizens use the platforms to speak up and to share their worries and their needs, and this leads eventually to a transformation and to new measures, new laws that impact positively in our life. And then we had this floating question a bit: is the work of civil society organizations sometimes taken for granted? What about the role of different forms of education and training or certification when we talk about youth work, when we talk about non-formal education, different sorts of opportunities that are not necessarily the traditional formal education system followed with a diploma and so on. So we're talking about that.
Excellent. Really, really well captured there. Pretty impressive stuff. And I think so much depth gone into that, and a lot more that will certainly inform the conversation as we continue. We'll be having another panel this after the break, and I'm sure we'll develop upon all of those themes as well. So thanks so much, Elia. Okay, folks, so we're doing pretty good on time, I think, and unless Emma or Emily want to chip in with any housekeeping, we will start to go on to a break now. So just I think we're in good, are we, Emma?
Yeah, we're bang on time. Well done, Rory. Thank you very much, everybody. I think we have 15 minutes now for a break, so we can be back.
Okay. Well, they actually will. Yeah, we're almost at 1:15, so they have 16 minutes, an extra minute. Yeah, amazing.
Great. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, 1:30, folks, Irish time that is, obviously. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everybody. You're all very welcome back. That's if you are back, because I can't obviously see everybody's faces. So hopefully you're making your way back to the screen, and thanks again to everybody who joined this morning. Thank you to you all for joining, but particularly our speakers and our panelists and all of you involved in the chat and the Menti and the questions. And we'll get going now, and we'll have more questions and interaction as well, more Menti interaction, and also more Q&A with another panel. So we're going to move on now to our second panel, and the second panel is on freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. And I'm going to welcome on our panelists now and introduce them all. We have Suzanne Kavanagh. Suzanne works for Léargas. We've already heard from Léargas. Suzanne oversees the European Solidarity Corps, which is the program that's been mentioned that promotes EU values through volunteering. Welcome, Suzanne. And we also have Barry Colfer. He's the Director of Research at the Institute of International and European Affairs, which is Ireland's leading international affairs think tank. Welcome, Barry. And then we have Thomas Kramer, and he's a community manager at the European Parliament Liaison Office in Ireland. And that office provides public information on the European Parliament's role, powers, and activities. So very, very relevant to the conversation that we've just had. Welcome, Thomas. And then last but not least, we have Emily McVicker, and she's a volunteer manager, the volunteer manager at the Solace Project, which is a Dublin-based organisation, and it delivers programs that empower children and young people. So you're all very welcome. Looking forward to this conversation, and we're going to start with you, Barry, if you don't mind. Barry, I'm just wondering if you have some reflections on the previous conversations, but also then with a view to how are you seeing the values that we've discussed being reflected, or perhaps even not reflected in EU policy, whatever you might have to say on the matter. Thanks, Barry.
Thanks a million, Rory. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Listen, it's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks a million for the opportunity. It may come as no surprise. I'm going to pick up on the latter of what you said. I'm going to think of where EU values reside and where it works. And I'm conscious of time, right? But I want to try and make 3 quick points, if I may. So firstly, I won't repeat all of what's been said by the other panelists and the minister regarding the values the EU holds dear, you know, the respect for human rights, equality, the rule of law, the rights of persons belonging to minorities. And in a really practical sense, if I ever want to feel inspired or to identify where EU values are kind of matched or shown in EU policy making, so I can either look at Rocky or great speeches from my favorite films if I want to feel inspired, or classic moments in Irish sport, or you probably watched the Eurovision.
I didn't expect Rocky to get involved in this conversation, but let's roll with it.
In the next 3 minutes, if you can roll with it, and thanks for patience to my fellow panelists. But I also look at the language of the preamble and Articles 2 and 3 of the Treaty on European Union without getting too geeky. Right? We talk about tolerance and justice and solidarity and equality between men and women. And I encourage everyone to read these if you're ever feeling down or in need of inspiration, the preamble and Articles 2 and 3. But talking to my 3 points, where I think I see the values of freedom, democracy, the rule of law actually being lived in EU policy, I'm going to make 3 related points. Firstly, making things in the EU, making policy takes ages, and it's predictable and it's transparent. So you always know what's going on. Right? So it's really hard to hide anything in how the EU does policy actually. So it's an open book. Secondly, and I think this is of interest to Ireland, but also to many of the people who said hello on the chat, that I always try and remember that the EU is 27 countries, but 20 of them are small. The population is below 11 million. So it's something that's often overlooked, but you know, Ireland is small, there's small countries in every corner of the EU, and care is always taken in current EU policy making to ensure small members are not unfairly outvoted and that no one's spoken over and everyone has a voice. And finally, and I'll speak by this at a tiny bit of length, just 45 seconds. It's a point on language. The EU is 27 countries, 450 million people, 3 time zones, 24 official languages. The Irish became an official language on the 1st of January this year, as many of you know. But to sketch out where I think you see this, so they're trying to do a sketch of where I think the values are inhabited and are lived. If you ever visit the European Parliament in Strasbourg, or when it meets in Brussels, and you see this happening, it's like something from the Galactic Senate in Star Wars. You didn't expect a Star Wars reference either, Rory, I'm sure, but you're in this massive room with hundreds of MEPs, with simultaneous translation happening. The boxes behind you, someone making a point in Polish, there's a question being asked in Portuguese, someone in Swedish or Irish or Romanian wants to make a point, and it's really cool. And for me, it's where the EU is really in action. And just wrapping up, like I say this knowing we're joined by colleagues in Ukraine and Russia, but in the EU, you know, for 1,000 years, we had conflict, permanent conflict. And for the past 100 years, you have people fighting across chambers and desks rather than across trenches. And if you ever visit the trenches in Ypres, like some of you may have done in Belgium, and you get this sense of Europeans in a hole in the ground taking shots at each other 100 years ago. This wasn't long ago. And now instead, what we have with the EU, for all of its lamentations and for the criticisms that it would receive, we still have these people, but you know, the motto being diversity and unity and diversity, these people who shared so much conflict over the past 1,000 years, you know, just arguing across desks and making policy in 24 languages.
Wow. Well, there was quite an amount in that, Barry, and Star Wars and Rocky as well. And I'm just thinking that you're the director of research, but you should be the director of communications for some EU body, because you also talked about how cool it was and you really brought everything to life. And I suppose it is, let's just be honest here, like a lot of people, quite frankly, disengage and get bored by the bureaucracy that might be there. But when you actually tease into it, it's actually quite a fascinating human and historical experiment, particularly when you bring it back to the trenches. So your imagery was very evocative there. And I think it's good to kind of hear and sense that passion for that project, I suppose the spirit or the essence of it all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious where this is me going off script here massively, but I'm just wondering where did that passion for you come from?
Yeah, I'll answer where the passion came from, and then I'll give you another little, if I may, just another little sketch from my time at the institution. So basically, my passion comes from two places. I'm what's called the Eurobrat in the European parlance. That my dad was a civil servant, so I actually grew up in Brussels when I was 12, right? So I was surrounded by diversity, and I came from like a regular home in Ireland, and then I was brought to the heart of the European Union, and I just really found it really cool and really impressive, and people who had experienced conflict so recently had managed to put it behind them. But then, like, just through life, I studied politics, and I think the European project, for all of its failings, is the greatest experiment in regional integration in the world, and we should remember that, notwithstanding all the weaknesses that it has. But we should always identify its great strengths. But if I can just sketch out something as well, right? I went to work in the European institutions for a period of time. I was at the European Parliament, and it was really great, really privileged experience. But at that time, I shared a desk with a Ukrainian, and we shared an office. There was 20 people working in it, and there was a chap who's from the Roma community in Spain, and I'm still very good friends with these two lads. And I have to say, before or since, I've never worked anywhere outside of the institutions where you had that level of diversity, people from France, Italy, Ireland, Spain, but also further afield partner countries. And you could look at this as like a bit tokenistic, because it kind of was. It was like a selected group of people who went through a competition to work in this environment. And I'm thinking back to the lofty values that Lorraine Gilligan mentioned. It's not easy to translate these lofty values that I just spoke about before into tangible actions. But I always think, and I think I learned this when I was a student, like, it's always better to do something than to do nothing. And these kind of really small things really matter. It's these conversations between me, my Ukrainian pal, my pal from the Roman community in Spain, like, that really mattered to me and to everyone else in that kind of small group. And I think the ripple effects do actually count. Conversations that have been had thousands of times ever since. So the passion I have comes from that as well. These kind of first-hand experiences, and if only every workplace could be like that.
Yeah, and going back to the previous panel as well, to allow more people to have those opportunities and insights as well, and you can really feel that passion still very much alive in you. How do you think that the values that we're talking about specifically translate here to Ireland, and if you've anything to say on the community and youth sectors, or just Ireland in general?
Do you know what I'll say? I'll make a really small point, but then I really would love to hear from colleagues on the panel, because I exist in the realm of ideas, and it's really cool. But we do research and events. Students go free, by the way, if anybody wants to join the IA.com. But so I have the
communications all the way there.
Thanks.
Go on.
Thanks. You'll lend me that one, right? But I don't work on the ground in communities like some of the incredible people you've brought together for these other panels. So I do want to leave oxygen for them.
Yeah.
But I do just want to make one point, if I may, that there's always this sense. I've had the pleasure as well. I've lived in 7 European countries. Lived in Ireland, the UK, France, Belgium, Greece, Romania, Italy, elsewhere. And there's often the sense of the EU as something that happens to you. It's something that to them, it's external thing.
True.
I really, really try and remember, and I also teach, so I try and inform my students that the EU is 100% us. Like, there's nothing else beyond the 450 million Europeans, and it's precious and it's fragile. And many really important Irish people have made a big impact on the EU over the years. Irish commissioners, civil servants, John Hume, Catherine Day, David O'Sullivan, my current boss, but also millions of citizens, And the EU is really something that happens it happens from us, but it doesn't happen by itself. It happens because of the good work being done by many of the people you've brought together today. And I just kind of want to make that point that the EU sounds great, but it really only works if we make it happen. So perhaps it would be a good time to invite some of the people who do actually make it happen in the communities around Ireland. Thanks a million, Rory.
Great. Thank you, Barry. Okay, so we'll move along to the rest of our panel now. We'll move on to Suzanne, if you're ready to join us. Suzanne, we've talked a lot about things like freedom and democracy, and they can be big kind of lofty ideals and lofty words. But just going back to the European Solidarity Corps, how do you think that those values are evidenced in the Solidarity Corps as such, and how does the rubber hit the road, so to speak?
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. And can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Great. So thanks a million for having me this morning. I have a really easy job because actually We've got some great projects here today. So thanks a million, Kay and Emily, for those inputs, and Kay for talking about the support from Léargas. So in order for organisations to participate in the programme, they have to show and demonstrate their commitment to these values. They do that through a quality label application process. And we hold that very high. I was at an event yesterday with newcomer organisations talking about these values and talking about how their work is connected to those values. The organisations do amazing work, obviously, and they make massive changes through the volunteering programs that they have, but also then by bringing in the European volunteers, they actually open that even wider for their target group and also for the European young people that they give the opportunities to. There's a dedicated space, I suppose, and an explicit demonstration of that commitment to those values in all of the program guides, the applications, and I think that is a really good way of actually for organizations not to just think that this is a funding opportunity, to look at what they do and how that connects to the program. This idea, obviously, it's solidarity is in the name, but under that, I suppose the idea of active citizenship, having the movement and freedom to be able to move and participate in a democratic process in whatever way, be it that the organizations are connected to a policy or actually they're explicitly campaigning or lobbying. So there's I suppose the fact that it is so explicit and clear for organizations to actually demonstrate their commitment to these values shows that actually this is a way of promoting it, but also to make sure that the young people understand that this is part of the program, that they're not just here volunteering, for example, in a homeless organization, you know, that they're actually connected to these values. So
presumably that gets covered a lot in sort of induction processes and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Just then we talked earlier about how important, let's face it, like the topic of investment came up a lot, and you know, it's all very well to say go off and do your thing, but if those of us that are doing it on the ground aren't resourced, so that brings us back to funding. And can you talk just about what types of funding specifically then is available for the European Solidarity Corps and how it comes into play and how it can be realized in promoting the values?
Yeah, so organizations now will receive a grant that covers the volunteers' travel expenses, and it also provides them with a management fee, a project management fee, and also their food and accommodation for the volunteer. So it also gives them a funding to support young people with fewer opportunities, so that they get extra funding for that. And there's also then, so the organizations can apply for that grant and to support what they're trying to do in terms of their expansion, out, you know, reaching further out into the communities, and also kind of developing new and better practices. And then for the young people themselves, they can apply for a grant themselves under their solidarity projects. So they themselves are activated to address an issue in their community, and they're supported through that grant as well. And actually, just to say on that, in February, we had a deadline under the Solidarity Corps, and for the volunteering projects, we awarded 1.4 million across 27 organizations to support.
Brilliant.
I think it was about 80 volunteers. So yeah.
That's fantastic. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Suzanne. So we might get a final word from you before we wrap up the panel as well, if you want to share any further insights. So we're going to move on to Thomas. Thomas, you're very welcome.
Hi.
So Thomas, I don't know if you might consider yourself an expert, but I certainly think you have a lot of expertise around how the European Parliament works, and it's something that, you know, not everybody particularly understands the inner workings and so on, and we don't have time for it all today, obviously, but I'm just wondering if you could talk maybe a little bit about how the European Parliament safeguards democracy, and particularly EU democracy.
Well, thanks very much. And it's interesting you say that, because while I was preparing my speaking notes, I was talking to my boss and he was saying, like, look, you might not feel like an expert, but the people that you're presenting this to, they know vastly much less than you about the European Parliament. So keep it simple. And I think before I start, I'm very sorry, we've for once got really good weather in Ireland, and everybody who lives here knows that is precious. And one of my neighbours has decided to use that to do a bit of work in the garden. So if you hear anything in the background, my apologies.
It's not so bad. It's not so bad. I can't personally hear it anyway. So
very good.
Anyway, we'll have social solidarity with your neighbour and their need for gardening.
Exactly. That's the European spirit. And I think, sort of, just to give you a quick insight sort of into what role the European Parliament plays in this sort of European democracy, it's the only EU institution that is actually directly elected by EU citizens. So every 5 years, and 2 years again, it's time for us to go and cast our vote and choose the MEPs that we want to represent us in the European Parliament. And it's sort of like in any sort of national parliament, what they do is they debate laws, they say we want them, we don't want them, we don't change them. That's kind of sort of the normal business. And I think what sort of, in addition, where the European Parliament has an influence on our democracy is that it can make sure it checks that the other EU institutions actually do the job that they're meant to do, and that they're doing them in a way that they're meant to be doing them in a way. And one example to give you there is, for example, the famous Article 7. Some of you might have heard that in the news. What it means is actually there is a regulation now in the EU that says if there is a risk that any member state undermines the rule of law, or basically sort of undermines the fundamental values that we share in the EU, that then we have to do something against that. And that's something the European Parliament can trigger. And I'm not going to go into more details because there's a lot more I could tell you about sort of the rights and powers of the Parliament. But I think one really key thing here is that in recent history, but even like since the Parliament started, it's probably been that part of the EU institutions that's looked the most into, are we really upholding the values of the laws and the democracy that we aspire to have? And it's been the most vocal about advancing EU democracy. And that is something sort of, to give you an example, very recently the Parliament was very vocal towards the Commission to say, look, you need to do more following up on what's happening in some member states when it comes to the rule of law. And you need to do more. And that is something I could give you a couple of examples more.
Yeah, do give us an example. Yeah, please.
Perfect. So basically, for example, one thing that happens is that every so often the European Commission will come and check what's the status of the rule of law in member states. And then they write a report about it. Everyone can look at that. Now, what the Parliament has specifically done repeatedly is to say, like, look, it's not enough to just have that report. What we need to do is that we have to have follow-up actions. We have to have more scrutiny. And that's something sort of basically where it can really make a difference for us to have our directly elected representatives in the Parliament, because if nobody's looking at that, it wouldn't be discussed, and it's all clear to us that we need also we've got great sort of, as Barry said, we have a great sort of experiment in the EU of sort of bringing democracy among 27 different countries, but we also need somebody to make sure that that we keep stick to the rules that we have. And sort of to give you another example, what's happened very recently, for example, you would have been aware that there's a lot of disinformation out there, that now there's also attempts, for example, you would have heard maybe of the Pegasus spyware, trying to listen in to journalists or politicians and so on. Parliament has set up sort of specific committees to look into that, both sort of in the disinformation side and sort of also on this, like, let's say, like spying on people's mobile devices side, and to say, like, look, this is a danger to our democracy. And we need to make sure that we're on top of that, and that we find ways to safeguard our democracy against sort of these actions. And if I might sort of just link in with what Barry said, sort of what motivates me, I think, sort of to do this work for the Parliament is it is this like peace project, and I think that's something that is easily forgotten. But I think now that we're seeing that on our doorstep in Europe, there is military aggression against Ukraine. I think we can all understand much better that peace is fragile and peace is worth preserving. And that's something sort of that I think the Parliament ultimately stands for, and that's what also stands behind the spirit of the EU.
Yeah, very well said, Thomas. And obviously, I can detect a good northern accent there, and there's obviously a resonance on this island for the value of peace and the importance of peace, and something that we can't necessarily ever take for granted. And the EU has been important sort of part of ensuring that peace and maintaining the peace, and hopefully will continue to as well. So that's a bigger conversation maybe, but it obviously brings into question the relevance of the EU and the border and so on. So thank you, Thomas. Much appreciated. We're going to encourage people to chip in any questions for Thomas or Barry or any of the other panelists here, and use the chat facility there. And we're going to go to our final panelist now, Emily McVicker. So Emily, you're very, very welcome. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me today. I'm the second northerner.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. Well, I'm originally from the border region, so we'll form some sort of alliance here.
Very good. I've been in Dublin for a long time, but I haven't lost the accent. So
good to hear.
Thanks for having us today.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. So I'd love to just know more about the work of the Solace Project, particularly the after schools program, and where the idea for that came from and how it might be relevant to what we're discussing today.
Yeah, so we are based in Dublin 8 in the heart of the Liberties, so an area of a lot of historical heritage in Dublin city, where you get a very wide mix of, particularly today, in today's society, we have so many cultures and communities all in this one area together. We've got tourism and businesses such as Diageo, and then we have people moving into the area, so middle class people who can afford to buy in the area today at the prices that houses are selling at. And then we've got the original communities who have lived in this area over generations and generations, and in amongst these communities, which are the community we work with, would be people who've come from other countries as well. So people who've immigrated to Ireland who are living in social housing. So it's a very interesting place to work. That just gives you a bit of a geographical context for our work. So our after schools project was the first thing that formed Solace Project as such. Today we work with children from 5 right up to 24, and we work with young people at risk. So we have a justice program which works with young people who have left school early or who have been involved in antisocial behaviour. We work in the different detention centres across the city as well, Wheatfield, Mountjoy and Oberstown Youth Detention Centre. So that's something that we've expanded into. But what we started with back in 2007 was an after schools group, and it started from a woman who founded our organisation, Sala Heron. She lived in the community, and she's from Finland herself, and she saw a huge need for young children for some sort of intervention. And comparing it to where she had come from, which the government in Finland that she'd grown up with had a very different approach to this sort of thing. So as a child psychologist, she was very brave to give up her job to start up something, and ran a small project of after schools for 10 girls in the local community in one of the ground floor flats, and the area is called Basin Lane. So a very needy community, and we still have that flat today. We still run our junior after schools club from that flat today, and still rent it off to Dublin City Council. So that's how it all began. And then as we got into the project, it was very much volunteer-led project. We discovered the European Solidarity Corps and the support that could provide for the project. So we've been running with the European Solidarity Corps now for the last 8 or 9 years, just before I joined the organisation. And they bring so much to the project. And we, at the moment, for example, we have 8 young people involved on a daily basis in the running of the after schools clubs. We've got 2 after schools clubs now, and cover the whole of the primary school age group, and we've boys and girls, and all from this local area. And we have 8 volunteers from Netherlands, Germany, France, Ireland. So we have such an international team, and just hearing you all talk today made me realize what a privilege it is for our kids to be exposed to this, which is quite unique in some ways for an after schools program, to have such a wide range of nationalities and cultures involved. So 3 of those young people are here with the European Solidarity Corps program, and the difference that program can provide to us is that they can be here for the 12 months. They really get an opportunity to become embedded in the community, to get to know the children and build up relationships with them. That's one of our core values, is building up trusting, loving relationships, providing a safe space for children to be in every single day, a place where they can let down their hair and have fun, eat a healthy meal, and just sit around the table like in a family. So they become family. The European Solidarity Corps volunteers are part of that. So I love this quotation from the National Strategy for Volunteering in Ireland, which is a recent strategy which really supports the work that we do. It says, a global citizen is someone who is aware of and understands our rapidly changing, interdependent and unequal world and their place in it. They take an active role in their community and work with others to make the world more equal, fair, sustainable in the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I suppose this works both ways for us. This works for the young people who we're advocating for, who we want to see grow in self-worth and confidence and believe in their own ability. And this also then works on the flip side for the volunteers who are here working with the young people. We're inviting them into a deeper knowledge and understanding of having an empathy for today's societal challenges, and they can see that in another context, maybe from the context that they were brought up in. So then, the impact that can then have on them as they return to their communities or to another community that maybe they decide to travel somewhere else in the world, they can bring that with them. So the wider audience we can have involved in this work, I feel the wider we can spread the need and the voices of the young people that we work with.
That's fantastic. It's really inspiring. And I love the founding story as well. And I love the idea that there's a little pocket of Finland pollinating in Dublin. If only there would be more Finnish pollination elsewhere in childcare and housing and education and so on. It's really inspiring. And also, you mentioned that, remind me of the founder lady's name, Salah?
Salah.
Yeah, just that she was brave, to sort of take on the challenges that go with setting up any kind of enterprise or community initiative and all the precarity that comes with that. But you know, the fact that there's EU support available is so significant. And I'm also imagining these volunteers running around with Dublin accents. Does that end up?
Yeah. It's so impressive. The level of English of some of the young people who come to us is very impressive.
Yeah.
And they often say to me in the interviews, oh, you know, I want to come and improve my English. And I'm like, your English is perfect. But we have had volunteers who've come at the beginning who've really struggled. And within months, you know, they've got an inner city Dublin accent and they're saying, that's massive, you know. So, yeah.
Brilliant. That's great. Thanks so much, Emily. So we're going to just move into, I got some questions from the participants sent to me. So we're going to go back to Barry. So Barry, there's a question here for you, and it says, we sometimes forget that the EU is fundamentally a peace project. It was founded on the premise of never forget, but are we forgetting? And if we are, what do we do, especially civil society?
We're forgetting that it's a peace project. I guess we just have to remind ourselves, you know, the EU was built at a time, and it was, the founding documents were written by people who had been in the war and who could still see it and smell it, and who, you know, had experienced the destruction of most European economies in the 1950s. So, you know, it's we all have our kind of origin stories, and it's extremely important for us to recall that. The EU is about other things as well, you know. The peace project is absolutely vital, but at the time as well, you know, the EU was founded in the context of the early stages of the Cold War, you know, the kind of threat coming from the East and the idea of European economies, many of them small, like I said, kind of buddying up, unity and strength, ní Bar Céile. So there's that, but also there's the kind of fundamentals of, you know, civil society shouldn't forget that the EU is also a project to try and improve the living and working conditions, as you heard from Eurofound, of millions of European people. And, you know, you don't need to look beyond Ireland to see that. How in the 1980s, which I barely remember, the 1990s, I very remember, you know, the standard of many things in Ireland have been raised for, you know, many, many reasons. We got some good questions about the peace process as well, which I hadn't mentioned, but, you know, just looking around our communities, there are so many examples of not just the peace process, not just the small countries in kind of a contentious part of the world buddying up, but also just the opportunities for economic and social activity, which, you know, millions of us have benefited from. And I'll conclude, it's down to the likes of myself and all our colleagues, academics, researchers, journalists, people in civil society, to remind everybody about that, and to remind everybody that we're all European, that the project's ours.
Great. Thank you, Barry. And going back to Thomas, and if Thomas, before you answer this question, if you feel inclined to comment on the Northern accent, by all means, you're welcome to, but there's no pressure to either. I just think it's interesting to just bring the North into the frame here, because it's very live for us all right now, given what's going on with the British government at the moment, and the involvement of the US and the EU government and so on. So bigger questions, but I'll move into the question, and you can choose to go elsewhere if you wish. And the question that was sent in is: a healthy civil society is central to democracy. How does Parliament cooperate with civil society to support and protect it? Is the importance of this understood by the EU?
Thank you. Actually, I think it's quite a fitting environment actually to comment on the accent, because it's actually the result of me doing something like the social solidarity corps at the age of 19. I went to Belfast and I met my future wife there, and I think it's the sort of the living expression of how life-changing these sort of experiences can be. And I think sort of how the European Parliament engages with civil society, I think on quite a few different levels, but I know it best sort of how we do it here in the office, and that is that we sort of try. We don't have loads of funding, so to say, but we have a bit of funding, and that we would like to sort of give to projects that foster the idea of sort of enhancing European values, supporting communities, teaching people also about what the EU is, because I think I saw another question in the chat there is, why do people know so little about the European Parliament? And I think that sort of a big part of what we have to do, and we only have limited resources for it, is to reach out to civil society, to reach out to every citizen and tell them, like, this is what the EU actually does. And it's sort of the way you have your council and the way you have the Dáil, you've also got the European Parliament. And it's just another layer in this sort of wider democracy that you live in. And that it's difficult to get people to that point. I think, like many of us here, it's clear to us, but for many people out there, it's not. And I think it's a long road, I think, to sort of change that mentality. If I reflect on when I went to school, I think we spent 1 hour learning about the European Union. That was it. What I've seen here now is, for example, my colleague Margaret, she runs something called the European Parliament Ambassador Schools program, which is engaging with TY students to teach them about the EU for a whole year. I would have been over the moon to have done something like that. At that age, I had no notion about what the EU was.
Yeah.
And I think we just need more of these sort of initiatives. But it's hard. And I think like, since we're sort of in a community here of educators and community workers, I think just like, let's try to tell everyone who we're in contact with that there's more than just our country, there is the EU, and it's actually fun. Every time I do a cross-border event, the sort of the excitement that I see in people's eyes, meeting people from so many different people. And I think what you told us, Emily, there, it's amazing sort of what's possible when you bring so many different people together. We just have to sort of bring that across. And I think once somebody has experienced something like that, they will understand that there's a huge benefit from having this EU level in their life.
Yeah. It's interesting for me, Thomas. You've used the word fun, and Barry used the word cool, and you're injecting new life into the EU project single-handedly. Some interesting comments I just read in the chat also. Well, the first one now is from Mansour, and Mansour has said, do you think we need to further the military? I'm not sure that this is for me, this merits an entire day or week or month discussion, and I'm not sure if we have time for the discussion, but I do want to honor the importance of the questions, which one of them is, do you think we need to we need further militarization in the EU to protect citizens and its values? How do you feel about recent changes in attitude and militarization seen in Germany? Now, the challenge for me in answering that question could be that we have to talk about Finland and Sweden, and also then Ireland as well. But I do think militarism and militarization is something that definitely needs to be discussed. But also then in the context of where we're talking lots about war, we need to keep the word peace always at the front and center. And with that in mind, there's a great comment come in from Jerry McLinden. He said, I come from Northern Ireland, worked in Brussels and in and around the EU institutions in the 1990s. I'm conscious of how critical the EU has been in supporting the peace process in the North. More recently, I was struck by the public comments of one former loyalist leader on why in the Brexit vote in 2016, he voted to remain because of its contribution to the peace process, and also because it allowed us, irrespective of our identity, Irish or British or both, to live and work in peace, never to go back to the conflict of the past. So, you know, we're in this moment in time, peace and war, and the values therein to be discussed and debated and hopefully upheld in terms of the particular values that we're discussing today. So a lot in this, but I do want to get to the question that came in for Emily as well and give her a chance as well. Emily, a question came in and it says, what would you say to other civil society groups considering going for these types of projects? Sometimes it can seem like a lot of hassle in terms of applications, reporting. Yep, I can definitely empathize with that one. Is it worth it? Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it?
It's a great question, and I see Suzanne laughing as well because Suzanne understands more than anyone what the processes are like.
Yeah.
I would just say on that the support from Léargas is, you know, you can completely rely on Léargas for anything that you need, and particularly at the beginning when you're starting up the process of understanding the European Solidarity Corps programme. You will have all of their support, as you heard from Suzanne. They're always on our side trying to get us this funding. They have funding to give and want to give it out. So the support is there, certainly in Ireland, from my experience. And I've pretty much drove this programme as a volunteer manager in Sol's project. We all wear lots of different hats, as I'm sure you're familiar in the charity sector, but it's definitely worth it. We have 3 European students with us, and we have them over a longer length of time, so the 12 months, and just seeing them grow in confidence and leadership skills, and often in worldviews, and how this impacts their life is such a reward. And then seeing the impact that their involvement can have in supporting our staff and supporting the programme as well. So brilliant. I would say go for it, and remember that you will see the results when you're going through the process of the application.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emily. Thank you. So Suzanne, we'll just go to you for any final remarks if you want around funding and so on.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Emily. Because I suppose, look, just to respond to that as well about the application process, and we absolutely understand that taking those steps in can be difficult and challenging, particularly if you haven't got the resources. But we take that high support approach, as Jane talked about. We walk you step by step into the programme. I really believe in this programme. So it's, like I said, it's the easiest job I've ever done. You hear those stories from Kay and Emily, but actually to hear the stories from the young people as well. So check them out as well on the Léargas website. There's lots of stuff on the blogs. And if you need anything, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Suzanne. It's great to hear you and everyone so passionate about their jobs. You know, so often we're all zoomed out and burnt out and everything. So it's lovely to get that sense of passion and the belief. And for me, that's why this work really matters. And it can become infectious as well. And I think really there's a big leadership challenge right now everywhere for us to inject a bit more passion, positivity, and inspiration back into society at all levels. So onwards and upwards. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panel, Suzanne, Emily, Thomas, and Barry. Much appreciated. And we'll move on now. We're in the closing chapter here, just a few more minutes left. And I will call up Mr. or Mrs. or whatever gender mentee might be, and we'll get some interactive questions going on again. And again, it's a different link. Again, it'll be in the chat for you, or you can scan the barcode or use the code on your phone. And the questions are: what are your takeaways from the panel discussion? How do these values impact you and your work? How can we better promote these values in Europe today? What are your main takeaways and learnings from the event? What are your next steps? And I would say also apologies to anyone whose question we didn't get to today. It was just simply trying to manage the agenda and the time and the clock and make sure you all get wrapped up in time. And I also want to say, in case I forget, a special thanks to Emily and all the team who behind this event, with Léargas and the Wheel and everybody else involved in making it so kind of almost effortless in the technicalities and the planning and the production and the content and the speakers. Just a fantastic team behind this event. So thanks again. And thank you all for your input here on the Menti. So we're not quite done yet. We've another few minutes and we're going to go back to Olaya in a short time. But for now, I'll just give you a moment to start getting these Menti answers in. Takeaways. interesting, informative, inspiring, how exciting and unique the European project has been. Inspired about educational and mobility opportunities. Engaging with people across Europe is fun. Having a better understanding. Thomas, you're going to get credit for the fun. I think you'll be forever known from here in as the making Europe fun again. European project opportunities and chances. Informative. Okay, so we let that roll on for a little bit, and I'm going to see if Olaya is ready to come back to us now for her final input of the day. And a huge thanks for everything you've been doing in the background there.
Thank you. I'm indeed ready for the last sharing, and hopefully in just a few seconds you can have
Wowzers.
An overview of basically what has been going on today in the call. I will zoom in now to the part that we have just been listening to. And yeah, Barry was sharing with us 3 points related to the topic of the panel, the freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. The idea that, yeah, sometimes it can be challenging or difficult to transform these values into tangible actions, but we heard some stories, and we can surely agree that the ripple effect is there through the learning opportunities, the exchange opportunities, and these bonds are being created and that allow for the values to be shared. Then we also heard a bit more about, again, the EU programs and the opportunities that they provide, sometimes being a bit challenging for organizations or being perceived as just funding that is sometimes bureaucratic and difficult to deal with. But in reality, we came to the conclusion that it is always worth it, that it provides an impact, a positive impact in so many different levels, that it's definitely worth it, and especially counting with the support of the different NAs. It's a smooth process and smooth path. Then we also went to the example of Sola's project and the after school project and activities clubs that they have running on, and how it was born and what it means also to contributing to youth seeing their problems being dealt with and being supported. And then last but not least, we were also reflecting on the concept of peace, how the European Union is in itself a peace project, and how we can make this more visible to each citizens, to make them or to help them, support them in understanding that EU is just not an institution, but we all are the European Union, and we all contribute to it. And I just want to mention that, of course, this will be finalized after now. And I left strategically an empty space because I read in the comments, Jane was mentioning, oh, will we see Emily's quote in the recording? Indeed, it was a bit of a long quote, so I didn't have the chance to catch it, but we will come back to it. And then I will make sure to fill in the space with that beautiful quote from Emily.
Excellent.
So thank
excellent.
you very much.
Well done. That's hugely impressive. Really, really colorful, creative, and really clear as well. It's amazing to bring everything so concise and to remind us of all the different topics and issues we've discussed over the last couple of hours. So that's more or less it from me. I'm going to be handing over now just for a very quick final wrap up from Emma. And but I want to say a huge thanks to all the panelists, to everybody who contributed, to everybody who chipped in on the Menti and the chat, and to all the organizers as well, and to everybody who's just showed up today to be part of this, and to wish you all huge success with all the ongoing work that you're doing, and that you all may be drowning in EU funding before long, and may it be easy to manage and report on with any luck. So thanks from me, and over to Emma.
Thank you very much, Rory. I don't know, Emily, do we have any more for the Menti that we want to share? I don't know whether we need to come back to it. We can do that if we need to.
Yeah, there were 5 questions there, so I can share some from the other questions if you like.
And then I'll do my quick wrap up and let everybody go on their way.
Okay.
So great.
So there was me jumping the gun, trying to get out the door.
Rory, no, you're grand. You've masterfully brought us through today. We just want to make sure that we share these, so we just see that there's how do these values impact your work? So they're intrinsic. We just need to make the connection. That's a good point. This person teaches civil society. It inspires them to look through different opportunities available. It can be challenging, but also have a positive impact. hoping to include the values in future work, and it's a good opportunity to talk about EU values to your co-workers. So all excellent points there. Do you want to flick through any of the other ones, Emily? Great. And promoting values, collaborating with each other, getting involved in projects, absolutely. Through teaching and educating, we should start education at an early age, ensuring young people are informed and aware of the values, creating more opportunities, and through integrating it into school programs, and how it impacts our lives. And what are your main takeaways? So inspiring and lots of opportunities. I learned a lot about EU values. All the different opportunities, I suppose, is a good takeaway. The importance to demonstrate values. Trust is paramount between the institutions and its citizens. Contribution as citizen is highly important, ensuring that young people are informed. EU is very useful, important to uphold democracy, peace and social cohesion, and through projects and implementation in school programs. So all excellent points, and there's even more coming in, just so that you know, we will share all of this after with everybody who's been here, so you'll be able to read through these yourself at your leisure. And next projects is applying for, or next steps I should say, is applying for projects and making connections, researching opportunities, keep going and embracing Europe, demonstrate values in a positive way, inform all involved with young people on these values, implement all these values in everyday work, and promote EU values through activities and school projects. So that's really excellent. As I said, we will take all of this and of course Olaya's amazing image and share it with everybody afterwards. I have a few thank yous, but I did just want to, I think Emily, you have a couple of slides for me just around supports and things like that for anybody. As I think it was Jane that said, if you have a kernel of an idea for a project, there are different opportunities that you could, different supports that you can reach out to. So just first and foremost, we've mentioned this already, but there's a program that we run here at the Wheel called Access Europe. So it's an EU funding support service. So we provide updates on EU funding programs and deadlines. So that includes Erasmus Plus and the European Solidarity Corps, but also the many other European programs. We research them and condense them into a monthly newsletter, and that's completely free. So absolutely sign up for that. It's a good way to kind of keep your finger on the pulse about what's happening funding wise, but also events and policy wise. We provide free trainings and events, a little bit like this one, which we have done with Léargas, but also lots of other events. We can also do one-to-one advice and application support and signposting and networking opportunities at EU level. So one thing that we do have is our partner database. So if there are Irish organizations here, if you're interested in reaching out and connecting with European partners, like some of the ones that are on this call, you can upload a profile explaining who you are and what you're interested in. And we promote that out into Europe in the hope that organizations will be invited into projects. And for those non-Irish organizations here, check out our database and see if there's any Irish partners that you'd like to collaborate with for a project. So that's Access Europe. And then I know that there's some for Léargas who are collaborators for this event. They have lots of upcoming events that you might be interested in. So sharing challenges and successes of Erasmus Plus participation for those working in early childhood education and care is one of their upcoming events. There's also supporting young people in the great outdoors and well-being. There's also a soapbox for the European Solidarity Corps, Green Fingers for the European Solidarity Corps, and Sustainable Futures for the youth sector. And you can find out lots more information about their training and events and activities, and that hyperlink there. And we will, of course, follow up with all the links that you need to learn more and connect you directly with Léargas, and absolutely sign up for their excellent newsletters, events, and connect with them for support, because we're very lucky here in Ireland to have such a supportive and helpful national agency. So that's it for supports. I just need to finish by saying thank yous, and there's lots of people to say thank you to. I want to, of course, say thank you to Minister of State for European Affairs, Thomas Byrne, for his keynote speech and for really, setting the context for our discussions today. I also have to thank Lorraine Gilligan, who's the Executive Director of Léargas, for her message and for sharing some really fantastic examples of the EU values in actions through various projects that are happening here in Ireland. To all of our panelists, in no particular order, we had Jane Carter and Suzanne Kavanagh from Léargas, one on each of our panels, but we also had Rory Hart of European Movement Ireland, Kay McCabe of Involved Meath, Mary McCaughey of Eurofound, Barry Colfer of the Institute of International and European Affairs, Thomas Kramer from the European Parliament Liaison Office, and Emily McSicker from the Solus Project. It was all just really, really excellent, inspiring and interesting inputs from everybody. Of course, we have to thank our amazing graphic recorder. That was so impressive, the piece of art that she created there for us, and we're looking forward to sharing that with everybody. But Olaya Gonzalez Dominguez, just huge thank you for your work and for sharing it with us. And like I said, we're looking forward to circulating that around to everybody. I also have to thank our organisers, my colleagues and Léargas. So obviously Anna from Léargas has been a huge help and has been our main point of contact in organising today's session, and then also my own colleagues Emily and Christina for their absolutely brilliant coordination. I think it was a really smooth event and really interesting for everybody involved, so well done to them. And of course our kind of fearless leader through today's session, Rory McKiernan, thank you so much. As I said, you guided us masterfully through a very busy agenda with lots of interaction and lots of little complicated bits and pieces. So I think we can all agree that you're well qualified for the Eurovision for your next big gig. And finally, last thank you before I let everybody go is just thank everybody for joining us this morning, for sharing their ideas and their comments and their questions. It's been a very interesting pan-European discussion and very much in line with the kind of European spirit that we talked about today. So thank you very much for your participation. And that's it, we're finished it. We'll wrap up a whole 3 minutes early. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day.